We're going to make Dāng Guī Gāo. This is a Ming Dynasty recipe that I got from Shui, who's a doctor that I have translated some of his writings, and this was used mainly for things like to engender flesh after a wound, but it heals burns and this and that. I'll put, what it's good for in the caption in the comments for this video. So let's talk about the ingredients that we need for making a gao in general and for this gao in specific. First, we have to kind of calculate how much we want. And a while ago, somebody gave me 6 of these little containers. I probably wouldn't buy plastic anymore, but they were given to me, so I figure I'll use them up. So I measured, and each one had 20 milliliters, capacity. So since I have 6 of them, then I want a total of 120 milliliters. And based on that, I calculated how much oil and how much beeswax. So this recipe has 6 parts of oil to 1 part of beeswax for a total of 7 parts. So I divided the 120 milliliters that we wanted for the whole thing by 7. And so that's the containers I'm using. More often, I would use these kind of tins here that you can buy, pretty easily. One of the good things about the tins is that they don't let light through, and light can sometimes damage the gao. Another thing I've sometimes done if I'm just making for myself is some of my face cream, when the container is empty, then I might wash it off and reuse it just for my personal use. Okay. So then we need some ingredients. We need sesame oil. So I just go to the Chinese stores, and although this is a Japanese brand, I buy a big can of sesame oil if I'm going to be using a lot in the future. People ask about toasted versus untoasted. I really don't know what the ancient people used. It doesn't say, but it's easier to find the toasted. I use that. Of course, you could use olive oil or tea seed oil or other kinds of things, not tea tree oil, tea seed oil. But I generally go the traditional route, not the commercial route, the traditional route. So I've pre-measured, and actually I weighed it out rather than using the measuring on that cup, but I have the measure there. I've also measured out the beeswax. These are pellets that you can buy, today. They're 100%, you have to ask for 100% pure beeswax, but those melt much easier. They're easier to measure out and deal with. Of course, in the farmer's market, you can buy a big brick of beeswax, but it's what I'd like to do to support the local farmers and their bees, the local beekeepers and their bees, but it's just really a lot easier to use these pellets. But you have to make sure that they're beeswax, because otherwise they might be paraffin or part paraffin. And then they're the herbs. And this recipe has Dāng Guī. It's called Dāng Guī Gāo. And so this just happens to be the Dāng Guī I have currently measured out. And this is actually shēng. It doesn't look a lot like it, but this is the shēng I happen to have. I might chop it up some more to get some more surface area. I don't have to do that for the Dāng Guī because it's really thin sliced. So those are the ingredients. What else am I going to need? Cheesecloth. So, to strain it, and actually a strainer. So, got my little strainer, and I've cut some cheesecloth. So first I'll scoop out, jiggle. I'll scoop out the herbs and dispose of them from the, from the pot after they've been cooked. But then the oil still needs straining because it will you know, still have little bits in it. And this strainer fits right in this container, so I'll strain it back into the same container. I've got stirrers and scrapers of various kinds in here, and a little pot to cook it in. Finally, I've got labels, because it's always good to label what the gao is and when you made it, because you don't always remember later. If you only ever make one thing, you might remember, but if you make a bunch of things, sometimes they all look alike and it's hard to remember, so labels are important. Okay, so I'm gonna start cooking this. First, of course, we need to put the oil in the pot. I have a small pot because I don't want to make a lot of it. It wouldn't work as well in a big pot. So let's try and get most of this oil in. Okay, that's going to be good enough for now. Then I have to turn the stove on. Yeah. So you never want oil to smoke. So we have to make sure that we keep the temperature low enough while we're cooking. But we want to wait a little while before we add the herbs. And here's the trick. How do you know when it's done? Okay. One way you know is a lot of recipes have a lighter color herb like Dāng Guī, okay? Or a lot of these kind of gao also have baijiu in it, which is very white colored herb. So what I've come to understand is the goal, both from experience and also from reading in the old books, is when the light colored herb turns dark, but not blackened, that's pretty much when it's done. And so basically I think of it like French fries. And if this was uncooked French fry and you were going to, deep fry it, which is basically what we're doing, is deep frying these herbs. If you were going to deep fry it, then, when it looks done, when it looks cooked, a nice golden color, much darker than that, that's when it's done. So I don't know if it's hot enough yet, but I'm going to start to put them in. I want to be a little careful and not splash myself. There, the shēng is in and doesn't seem to be doing much, so I'm going to wait a little while before I put the Dāng Guī in. We can put the last bit of this in now. Yeah. So I'll reuse this container when we strain it. In fact, let me get this ready. There. Okay. I also have another, I don't know if you can see, like plastic bag to put the dregs in. It's in another plastic container just to support the bag. So I'm gonna, it still doesn't seem to be excessively hot. Yeah, try this way. It's starting to cook. So I'm gonna now add the Dāng Guī in. Oops, it's stuck. Okay. And I know the angle's not perfect. I don't have an overhead camera. But now I'm just gonna let it simmer for a while, and I'm going to turn the camera back on when it's really cooking. I'm going to pause for now. Can you see it's bubbling now? So it's starting to simmer, but we have to wait till it turns dark like French fries. So I'm going to pause again. Simmering nicely now, but we don't want to let it get too hot. We don't want it to smoke. Starting to change color, but I'd still like my French fries a little darker. And there we go. That's nice and brown, much browner than before. So, oil stays hot for a long time. I'm going to turn it off. And there's no rush to pull the herbs out. I can let it cool for a while like this, and it's probably safer if I let it cool for a while, but I still want to make sure because it's staying pretty hot, so they're cooking, don't want them to get burnt. So I'm going to wait a little while before I remove the herbs. Okay, 15 minutes has gone by, so it's not so hot. I'm less likely to burn myself, which I've been known to do. So I'm going to start scooping out the herbs, but I want to make sure that they drip a bit. I could squeeze them out with a bigger piece of cheesecloth, but I'm going to be lazy and not do that. You can see how dark the Dāng Guī has become. You know, now it's really brown instead of whitish. So I'm going to pause a minute and finish this, and then we'll look at what's next. Okay, the dregs are over here. I'll just dispose of them later. So now I'm going to pour this through the cheesecloth. This can be messy, so I have it on a little tray. Let's see. Some spouts pour better than others, but we're getting all the little bits of dust. Ow. Yeah, I don't know if you can see, but there's, some grit inside. And we don't want that in the finished product. Okay. So if we wanted to be fancy, we could weigh the oil again to make sure that the proportion of oil to wax is exact, because the herbs absorbed some of the oil, and so we have less oil now than when we started. But it still looks pretty close to the same, so I'm not going to bother. I'm just going to use the wax I pulled, I measured out in advance. So we can take this over here. I could squeeze that out some more. Once again, I'm not going to do that right now. Okay. So what I'm going to do then is add in the wax, but this won't be hot enough for it to melt. And we don't really need to cook it more. We just need to get it warm enough to melt the wax. So first let me get all the wax in. And we're going to kind of double boil it, although we're not actually needing to boil, but that's what we're going to do next. So the wax is now in, and I'm going to pause to set up the next step. Okay, now we've got the herbal oil sitting in a pot of water that I'm heating, and the wax is in the oil, and as the water heats, the wax will melt, but we just want to melt it. We don't want to do, we don't want to cook it anymore. You do want it 100% melted though, because if there's still a little bit of wax pellet in it, the texture will not be right when you finally pour it. So we can keep stirring and heating the water, and eventually the wax will melt. So when the wax is almost melted, I'll come back. Okay, you can see it's almost melted in. We double boil because we only really want to warm it, and we want gentle heat. We don't want to scorch it, or it will have a burnt smell and not be so pleasant. I think it's pretty well mixed in now, so I can turn off the fire. Even if it wasn't quite, the heat of the water would still keep warming it, but it looks pretty done. So let's remove this, and I'm gonna dry it off there. Okay, I can get rid of the pot of water now. Okay, so the next step is going to be to pour it. Okay. So I can pour it right now, or I could actually let it cool and stir it to make a more creamy texture. I have the 6 original containers I want to pour it in. I have a couple extra because sometimes you calculate wrong and you have leftover. So you want to have something available. And I guess I'll just pour it. So this is the messy part. I do it on a tray. You can even do it on top of wax paper or regular paper. You don't want to overfill the containers. So far, I'm doing pretty good. Some spouts are better than others, and this tends to be a good. And it does look like I'm going to have some leftover. A lot of leftover, so I must have really miscalculated. Oh well. So let me move these forward. Maybe a little bit more. Okay. And I still have one more, but that's it. Okay, we'll come back in a minute when it cools. We can see it's cooling, but it's not 100% cool yet. I can still feel warmth in the container, and you don't want to put the lid on too soon. You don't want to, try to press your finger in, because there's probably on the inside like totally still liquid, even though the surface may start to be cooler. So we're just going to be patient. I made some labels. My writing is really ugly, but I made labels with dates. So I'm just going to hang out until they're really cool. Okay. Okay, time to finish up. I spread them out a little so they could cool off more quickly rather than being all together and tight. I also put label on the bottom. It may be more intuitive to put the labels on top, but what happens is if you open the jar and you open another jar, and then sometimes you don't remember which lid went with which jar, excuse me, so then it could get mixed up. But when the label's on the bottom, you're not going to mix up which one is which. So they're basically cool. You can check if you spilled anything. I notice I spilled a little there, so wipe it off, wipe it clean, and put the lids on. There. You don't want to put it in any spilled wax, so just look where you're putting it. I don't love these little jars, but like I said, they were for free, so I'm using them up. I could test it by sticking my finger into one, but actually I think it's never the texture exactly that you want until the next day. For some reason, it always seems a little different the next day. So I'm not going to judge it too much right now. But one way I could easily judge without messing up a jar of it is to play with the drips. And I don't know if you can see, but it melts pretty easily on contact with the skin because this was a 6 parts of oil to 1 part of beeswax ratio. So that's going to be pretty melty. And sometimes you want it pretty melty to moisturize, or if the region is like really injured, you don't want to have to use force to apply the ointment. So if when you keep track of this was a 6-to-1 ratio, and if you want it a little more solid next time, try 5 parts of oil and 1 part of beeswax, or 4 parts of oil and 1 part of beeswax will be much harder. In fact, the author of this formula, Shui, in another book, he said 4-to-1. So the range seems to be 6-to-1 down to 4-to-1 parts of oil to beeswax. So you can adjust the texture, but you need to kind of keep track of what you did so that next time you know how to adjust it. So anyway, that's Dāng Guī Gāo, and yeah, I'm done. See you later.